Hi, good morning. Coach Crazy Cat here from the Barnfus Bird Farm here in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina. And continuing on with our daily reading plan. Today, we will be reading through Judges 4 to 9. Judges 4 to 9. And that's from the 365 day reading plan. The theme for today is that God uses the weak, and we'll see that all throughout Judges. He pulls the most unlikely of heroes from the most unlikely of places. Excuse me, goodness gracious. So let's pray and let's get going. Father God, I just praise you for your beautiful word and for all the amazing lessons that are in here, God. I just pray that your words would come through me and that it would speak to the hearts of those that you want it to touch, Father. And I just pray that you would have me to be clear and to say what you would have me to say. I just praise you and all. Amen. Okay, so we are in 4. So remember that we're reading in Judges, and Judges is in 3 sections. Judges 1 and 2 was the overview, and actually I have an attachment that I'll share that comes from the Verse by Verse Ministries. And this is an overview of the breakdown of the chapters in Judges. So you can see Judges 1 and 2 is the background on Israel's apostasy in the land and the catalyst for the apostasy. So it's talking about them turning away from God and going to worship idols, and that they left the locals there and left a remnant in the... Yeah, so in chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, God declares a test of Israel's heart using the enemies in the land. And we're in chapter 4 now. So chapters 3 to 16 are the 6 periods of testing and apostasy. There's going to be 12 judges that are raised up to contend with the disobedience and the enemies. And then at the end, we'll do the outcomes and the consequences. And then there's a chart that just kind of maps everything out, because I like maps. And last time in chapter 2, we heard about Othniel and Ehud, the first 2 judges. And Othniel was from the tribe of Judah. He was Caleb's nephew, remember? And Caleb was one of the spies, and they are from the tribe of Judah. And it says back in Joshua, I actually have in the notes, I put together a little graph that kind of graphs out the first several judges. So Othniel was the nephew of Caleb, the spy, and that was from Judges 3:9. He's from the tribe of Judah, and they did not drive out the Jebusites, it said in Joshua 15:63. So because Judah didn't drive everybody out, now they're going to be dealing with some issues here from the locals, and Othniel was raised up to take care of that. They were in captivity 8 years before Othniel was raised up, and then they had a period of peace under him for 40 years. So that's 48 years so far they've been living in the land. The second judge was Ehud. He only had one good hand, remember? So he was an unlikely, like going on the theme of God raises up the weak. He was an unlikely person to be raised up to lead people in battle because he could only fight with one hand. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, which is in Judges 3:15. And Benjamin also did not drive out the Jebusites, and it says that in Judges 1:21. They were in captivity 18 years, but when Ehud was brought in, they had a period of peace for 80. So the cumulative is 146. Today we're going to go into Deborah and Barak, Gideon, and then we're going to touch on Abimelech. So that will be the next 3 judges will be covered today. So let's start in chapter 4. Our female judge. So when Ehud was dead, the children of Yisra'ელ again did evil in the eyes of Yehova. Therefore, Yehova sold them into the hand of Yabin, the sovereign of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera, and he was dwelling in Harosh Hogam. Hazor is in the northern part of Israel. They ruled in the Jezreel Valley, which was pretty flat, and you'll hear why in a second. And they oppressed Israel for 20 years. The children of Israel cried out to Yehova because he had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he harshly oppressed the children of Israel. So the chariots would ride along behind a horse, and it would have 2 guys in the back shooting arrows. So it was really powerful. And the Valley of Jezreel was a flat area, so they were able to wreak a lot of havoc. Deborah was a prophetess and the wife of Lepiddah. She was ruling Yisra'ელ at that time. She was dwelling under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim, and the children of Yisra'엘 came up to her for right ruling. So the first thing that we see, not only that she's a woman and she's a prophetess, and there were other prophetesses in the Bible, and they are women who listen to God, and they would interpret the word and explain what God was telling people, because we didn't have the written word back then. Miriam, Moses' sister, was the first one. She was described as leading the worship, dancing with timbrels when they came through the Red Sea. Isaiah's wife, which we have not heard about yet, Huldah, who is a lady who helps King Josiah. We'll hear about her later. And then Anna and Philip in the New Testament, their 4 daughters who were around the time of Jesus. And there's a theme here of women doing the right thing while the men are AWOL. They're reluctant, they're ungodly. And it's odd that a woman would rule in a patriarchal society. But she's a civic leader, obviously. It says here she's sitting under a tree. She's not out fighting. And in the next chapter in her song, we'll hear that she's a mother. So she's a mom. She's raising children. She's a civic leader. She's well respected because she trusts and knows God and is able to give people guidance based upon that. So in verse 6, she sent and called for Barak, the son of Abinoam from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, has not Yehova, Elohim of Yisrael, commanded, go, and you shall draw towards Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and the sons of Zebulun. And I shall draw you unto Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his company at the river Kishon, and I shall give him into your hand. And Barak said to her, if you go with me, then I shall go. But if you do not go with me, I do not go. So he's asking to have a woman coming along with him and support him. And probably because he didn't have his own faith in God and think that he could actually ask the questions and get guidance. And he wanted Deborah to be there with him. And she said, I shall certainly go, only there shall be no esteem for you in the journey that you are taking. For Yehova is going to sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. So Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. And he went up 10,000 men under his command, and Deborah went up with him. Heber the Kenite, Kenite, which is the Kenites were from the family of the father-in-law of Moses. The Kenites of the children of Hobab, of the children of Moses, and separated himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent near the terebinth tree at Sinom, which is by Kadesh. And they reported to Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera called all of his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the people who were with him from Harosheth Haggam to the river Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, rise up, for this is the day which Jehovah has given Sisera into your hand. Has not Jehovah gone out before you? And Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men after him, and Jehovah destroyed Sisera and his chariots and his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera leaped from his chariot and fled away on foot, but Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoim, and all of the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword, and not one was left. Sisera, meanwhile, had fled on foot to the tent of Yisra'eel, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, sovereign of Hatzor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. So I'm going to pause here for a second. So you can see here the Kenites. It was Moses's in-laws. So they inhabited next to each other and they were friendly, the Israel people. But it says here that he had made peace with the sovereign of Hatzor, the Canaanite. Probably because he was a worker in iron and he was making money selling them stuff. But anyway, so he was friendly with both the Canaanites and the Jewish people. So he's playing both sides of the fence. And Yisra'eel went into Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my master, turn aside to me, do not fear. So he turned aside with her into the tent, and she covered him with a blanket. Now, it's highly unusual that a man would go into a woman's tent back in this time. It was thought of very badly, but he was obviously desperate and trying to hide, and she seemed trustworthy. So in he goes, and he said, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a bottle of milk and gave him drink and covered him. She gave him milk instead of water. So milk was more precious back then, but also what does milk do? It makes you sleepy, right? And so he feels really comforted. And of course, he falls asleep. And he says, stand at the door. And if anyone comes, ask, is there a man here? And you say no. But Yisra'eel, Habor's wife, took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand and went softly and drove the peg into the side of his head and went deep into the ground, for he was fast asleep and exhausted. And he died. So she killed him. As soon as he fell asleep from drinking the milk under the blanket, she killed him. And see, as Barak pursued Sisera, Yisra'eel came out and said, come, let me show you the man whom you are seeking. And he went unto her tent, and there lay Sisera, lay dead with the peg in the side of his head. And on that day, Elohim humbled Yabin, sovereign of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Yisra'eel, and the hand of Yisra'eel grew stronger and stronger against Yabin, sovereign of Canaan, and they cut off Yabin, sovereign of Canaan. So that's that chapter finished. So it's all about Deborah, the prophetess, and Barak, who was listed in the Hall of Faith in Hebrew 11. So he did have faith, even though he, didn't show it outright, and he needed to have her support to go along. So chapter 5, and on that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang for the leaders, singing in Yisrael, for the people volunteering, bless Jehovah. Hear, O sovereigns, give ear, O princes. I do sing to Jehovah. I sing praise to Yisrael of Yisrael. And Jehovah, when you went out from Seir, you stepped from the field of Edom. The earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds also poured rain. The mountains flowed at the presence of Jehovah. This Sinai at the presence of Jehovah, Elohim of Yisrael. So this is talking back about when they were traveling through the wilderness and they encamped at the Mount Sinai, and Moses spoke to the rock and water came out. Leadership ceased. It ceased in Yisrael till I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel. So it's saying here that she's a mother. And the previous chapter says she was sitting under a tree. So she's a civic leader who trusts God and is close to God and helps other people. They chose new mighty ones. Then fighting was in the gates. So it's saying here that they went to idolatry, and then God brought the fighting. Neither a shield nor a spear was seen among 40,000 in Yisrael. My heart is towards the inscribers of Yisrael, the volunteers among the people. Bless Jehovah. You ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich carpets, and you walk along the way, declare it. By the voice of shouters between the places of drawing water, where they recount the righteous acts of Jehovah, the righteous acts of his leadership in Yisrael, then the people of Jehovah shall go down to the gates. Wake up, Deborah, wake up, sing a song. Arise, Barak, and lead your captives away, O son of Abinoam. And he set the remnant to rule the nobles. Jehovah came down for me against the mighty ones. Out of Ephraim, their root is against Amalek. After you, Benjamin, with your peoples, out of Maker, which is Manasseh, and scribers came down, and out of Zebulun, those who handle the scribes read. The heads of Issachar were with Deborah, and as Issachar, so was Barak sent in the valley under his command. Among the divisions of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Why do you remain among the sheepfolds to hear the beatings of flocks? The divisions of Reuben have great searching of heart. Gilead remained beyond the Jordan, and why did Dan sojourn by the ships? Asher continued on the seashore and remained in its hiding place. Zebulun is a people who risked their lives to the point of death. Naphtali also on the heights of the field. So it's saying here that Issachar and Naphtali and Zebulun fought, but Ephraim stayed where they were, and Dan stayed where they were. They just hung out, and Asher stayed where they were. They did not come in and help, which is kind of sad given that your brothers are in a fight and you stayed home. The sovereigns came, they fought. Then the sovereigns of Canaan fought in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They took no spoils of silver. From the heavens they fought. The stars of their courses fought against Sisera. The river of Kishon swept them away. That age-old river, the river of Kishon. My being you have trampled in strength. Then stamped hooves of horses with the galloping of its steeds. Curse, Meroz, said the messenger of Jehovah. Curse its inhabitants, because they did not come to the help of Jehovah, to the help of Jehovah among the mighty. Blessed above women is Yisra'eel, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Above women in tents as she is blessed. He asked for water, she gave milk. She brought out curdled milk in a bowl for nobles. She stretched her hand to the tent peg and her right hand to the workman's hammer. Then she pounded Sisera. She smashed his head. She pierced and struck through the side of his head. Between her feet, he bowed. He fell. He lay still. Between her feet, he bowed. He fell. Where he bowed, he fell. He destroyed. And that's just showing that he was completely put down and humbled there at the end. He's not only killed by a woman, but he falls right between her feet. Look through the window. The mother of Sisera looked and cried through the lattice, why does his chariot delay to come? Why have the steps of chariots tarried? The wise ones of her princesses answered her, and indeed she answered herself. Do they not find and divide the spoil, a girl or two for each man, a spoil of dyed work for Sisera, a spoil of dyed work embroidered, dyed work richly embroidered for the necks of the looter? So do all of your enemies perish, O Yehova. Let those who love him be like the sun rising in its might. And the land had rest 40 years. So if you refer to the chart that I put together, the land is going to have rest for 40 years under Deborah and Barak. And as just to point out, Judah, so the first leader, the first judge, ruler, whatever you want to call him, was judge. It was interpreted judge in English, but it actually meant ruler in Hebrew, which I think is pretty interesting. But anyway, so the first one was from Judah, who did not drive out the locals. The next one was from Ehud, was from Benjamin, who did not drive out the locals. And now you've got Deborah from Naphtali and Zebulun, who it says in Judges 130 and 133 that they did not drive out the locals. So God's going to be moving these issues throughout each of these tribes that didn't do what they were told, as a way to kind of clean it up later, because it was left as a stumbling block. So God gives us chance after chance after chance after sign, and we don't necessarily listen. So Deborah and Barak, the time they took over, Israel had been oppressed by these people for 20 years, and then they ruled for 40. So that takes us up to a cumulative of 206 years so far in this period. So now we're going to move on to the next guy, Gideon. Gideon's interesting. And the children of Yisra'eel did sight in the eyes of Yehova, and Yehova gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian was strong against Yisra'eel. Before the faces of the Midianites, the children of Yisra'eel made for themselves the refugees which are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. And it came to be, whenever Yisra'eel had sown, that Midian would come up, and Amalek and the people of the east would come against them and encamp against them and destroy the increase of the soil as far as Azza, and leave no food in Yisra'eel, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. For they came up with their livestock and their tents, coming as numerous as the locusts. They and their camels were without number, and they came into the land to destroy it. Thus Yisra'eel was brought very low because of Midian, and the children of Yisra'eel cried out to Yehova. It's interesting, as I'm reading that, I'm reminded of Deuteronomy 28. I'm just going to flip back there real quick. But Deuteronomy 28 is the Mosaic covenant, and the first 14 chapters is blessed are you, and these are all the things that are going to happen. But starting in 14, and do not turn aside from any of the words which I am commanding you today, right or left, to go after the mighty ones to serve them. And it shall be, if you do not obey the voice of Yehova your Elohim, to guard to do all of his commands and his laws, which I command you today, all these curses shall overcome you and overtake you. Cursed are you in the city, and cursed are you in the field. Cursed is your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed is the fruit of your body and the fruit of your land, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flock. Cursed are you when you come in, and cursed are you when you go out. Yehova sends on you the curse, confusion, and rebuke, and all that you set your hand to do, until you are destroyed and perish quickly because of the evil of your doings by which you forsake me. So the food's going to be taken. Here you see that. Cursed is the fruit of your land and the increase of your cattle. These people, these Gideonites, are just coming straight in. And the Midianites are coming straight in and just taking everything from them. And it came to be, when the children of Yisrael cried out to Yehova because of Midian, that Yehova sent a prophet to the children of Yisrael and said to them, thus said Yehova, Elohim of Israel, I brought you up from Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, and I brought you out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Mitzrites and out of the hand of all of your oppressors, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am Yehova, your Elohim. Do not fear the mighty ones of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell, and you have not obeyed my voice. And the messenger of Yehova came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress to hide it from the eyes of the Midianites. So usually you would thresh your wheat up on the top of the hill, because you would want to shake it. Threshing is like beating it, and then the kernels will come out. And it's much easier to do that up at the top, but they're doing it down low in the wine press because they're hiding. Because if he does it on the top of the hill, he'll be seen, and they'll come and take everything. And while he's doing this, the messenger of Yehova appeared to him and said to him, Yehova is with you, you mighty brave one. And Gideon said to him, O my master, if Yehova is with us, why has all this come upon us? And where are all of his wonders, which our father related to us, saying, Did Yehova not bring us up from Mitzrayim? But now Yehova has left us and given us into the hands of Midian. Sounds to me like he didn't hear the last part of Deuteronomy 28. He only heard the first part, which is all the blessings, but not the curses for not following God. And Yehova turned to him and said, go in the strength of yours, and you shall save Yisra'ელ from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? And he said to him, O Yehova, with what do I save Yisra'엘? See, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am least in my father's house. And Yehova said to him, because I am with you, you shall strike the Midianites as one man. And he said to him, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who are speaking with me. Please do not move away from here until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you. And he said, I shall stay until you return. And Gideon went and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot. And he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented it. And the messenger of Elohim said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. And the messenger of Yehova put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And the fire went up out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the messenger of Yehova went from his sight. So here he shows him a miracle demonstrating that he is a messenger, capital M. So this is actually Jesus before he's called Jesus. So in the Old Testament, when God would appear in the like a man, it was always the person of the Messiah out of the Godhead. So he came down and he performs this miracle so that Gideon will believe him. But it's going to take a lot more to get Gideon to actually listen, as you will see. When Gideon saw it, he was a messenger of Jehovah. Gideon said, "Oh, Master Yehova, for I have seen a messenger of Jehovah face to face." And Jehovah said to him, "Peace be with you. Do not fear. You do not die." So usually when they would see Jesus back then, or see the person of God, unless he came to them specifically to have a conversation. You remember Moses, when he saw the glory of God, it was in the form of a burning bush, and he had to cover his face. And even then his face was glowing. God is just so pure that we can't look upon him as sinners. We have to be in our purified state, which praise God that Jesus came so that we will be in a purified state one day. It's just so glorious. So continuing in 6:24, and Gideon built a slaughter place there to Yehova and called it Yehova Shalom. To this day, it is in Ophrah of the Amorites. And the same night it came to be that Yehova said to him, take the young bull of your father and the second bull of 7 years old, and you shall throw down the slaughter place of Baal that your father has and cut down the Ashērah that's beside it. So here his dad is worshiping the Baal and Ashērah, which are part of the Baals, plural. And you shall build a slaughter place to Yehova your Elohim on top of this rock in an orderly way, and shall take the second bull and offer it an ascending offering with the wood of the image which you cut down. And Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as Jehovah had said to him. And it came to be, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. So here we see another sign of Gideon's fear coming through. So God's told him to do something, and he's like, I'll do it, but I'm going to go do it at night, so no one comes out and yells at me. He was more worried about what men thought than what God thought. And the men of the city arose early in the morning and saw the slaughter place of Baal was broken down, and the Ashērah that was beside it, and it had been cut down, and the second bull was being offered on the slaughter place which was built. And they said to each other, who has done this deed? And when they had inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash has done this deed. And the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son that he dies, for he has broken down the slaughter place of Baal, and because he has cut down the Ashērah that was beside it. And Joash said to those who stood against him, you would plead for Baal, you would save him. Let the one who plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a mighty one, let him plead for himself, because the slaughter place has been broken down. So Gideon's father defends Gideon, which is great. So that day he took him Yisra'ėl, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he has broken down his slaughter place. And all of Midian and Amalek and the people of the east were gathered together, and they passed over and encamped in the valley of Yisra'eel. And the people of the east, I didn't see that before. But east usually denotes evil, the people of the east. So anytime God sends someone away, like Cain, who killed Abel, was sent east. Abraham was in the east, and Ur of the Chaldees, and he was brought west when he was purified. So you go east when you become evil, and you come west when you become good, which is kind of neat. And it's an interesting factoid that Jerusalem happens to be directly east of the old Babel. Directly west of the old Babel. So Babel's in the east, directly over here. And then Jerusalem is over here. They're east and west of each other. Jerusalem being in the west and Babel being in the east. The spirit of Yehova came upon Gideon. So remember, we've pointed out before that the spirit has to come upon people in the Old Testament. We live in a time and are so fortunate that the spirit is with us at all points. But that wasn't the case in the Old Testament. So Gideon blew the shofar, and the Amorites gathered behind him, and he sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh, who gathered behind him, and he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. So he's from the tribe of Manasseh, which we'll talk about in a second, because that's another tribe that didn't send out the locals. And then Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali helped him, which is cool that Zebulun and Naphtali came to help again, because they've recently just come through their own battle. Well, recently, 40 years ago. And they came up to meet him, and Gideon said to Elohim, if you are saving Yisra'eel by my hand, as you have said, I am placing a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there's dew only on the fleece and it is dry on the ground, then I will know that you are saving Yisra'eel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. He rose early the next morning and pressed the fleece and wrung out dew of the fleece to fill a bowl with water. And Gideon said to Elohim, do not be displeased with me, and let me speak only this time. Please let me try only this time with the fleece. Let me dry it on the fleece, and let there be dew on the ground. And Elohim did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew on the ground. So Gideon has seen God in the Spirit, Jesus in the Spirit, Messiah, the Old Testament Messiah, the Word, come down and burn up his sacrifice. He has taken down the idol and did that without any issues. And now God is telling him to go out and to fight, and he needs these two signs. So he says, all right, well, I need to know it's really you. So I'm going to put a piece of wool on the floor, and I want it to be wet, but everything else to be dry. And that happened. And then he said, I want you to do it in reverse. I want everything else to be wet and it to be dry. And God did both. So chapter 7, and Yisra'eel, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose up early and encamped by the fountain of Harod. So the camp of Midian was on the north side of the hill of Morah in the valley. And Yehova said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands, lest Yisra'eel boast against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. And now proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him turn back and leave Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people turned back, while 10,000 remained. And Yehova said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and let me prove them for you there. And it shall be that of whom I say to you, this one goes, then let him go. And of whomever I say, this one does not go, let him not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and Yehova said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue is a dog. Separate him from everyone who bows down with his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300, and the rest bowed on their knees to drink the water. And Yehova said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I save you, and shall save Midian into your hand. Let all the other people go, each to his place. Such an interesting story. So imagine that you're picking the water up and you're, drinking it this way as opposed to going down. And so it was not the common way, because most of the 10,000 did it the other way. So these guys were different. They were odd ducks. They kind of stood out. They were awkward, whatever you want to call it. And God now has told Gideon he can go into battle with 300, which is poetic justice, given that Gideon has been so afraid and needed so many signs. I guess that God was working with him on his fear. If you're afraid, if there's something that you need to work on, God will help you. By giving you trials related to that. So he's going to take him into battle with 300 people, which has got to be just so fearful. And Yehova said to Gideon, by the 300 who lapped, I save you, and shall give Midian into your hand. Let all the other people go to his place. And the people took food and their shofar in their hands, and he sent away the rest of Yisra'eel, each to his tent, but held on to these 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. And it came to be on that night that Yehova said to him, arise and go down to the camp, for I've given it into your hand. But if you're afraid to go down, take you and Purah, your servant, to the camp, and you shall hear what they say. And after that, let your hands be strengthened, and you shall go down against the camp. And he went down with Purah, his servant, to the edge of the formation of the fives who were at the camp. And Midian and Amalek and all the people of the east were lying in the valley, as many as locusts, and their camels were as numerous as the sand by the seashore. And Gideon came, and see, a man was relating a dream to his companion, and said, see, I had a dream, and see, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and it came to a tent and struck it. So it fell and overturned, and the tent fell down. And his companion answered and said, this is none other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Yisra'ЄL of Elohim, who has given Midian all the camp into his hands. And it came to be when Gideon heard this dream related and its interpretation, he bowed himself down and he returned to the camp of Yisra'ЄL and said, Arise, for Yehova has given the camp of Midian into your hand. So here's the fourth time that Gideon needed a sign. And this is a pretty awesome one. So God knew that he was still afraid, and he gave him an out here in verse 11. And so he and his companion, Purah, go down, and he overhears the enemy talking, and the enemy brings up his own voice. It talks about him. Can you imagine what that would feel like to hear your enemy talking about you and saying great things that you're about to do? That is definitely God working, which he can do if we trust him. It's pretty neat. And it came to be when Gideon, he said, Arise, Yehova has given the camp into our hand. And so verse 16, and he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. So 3 companies of 100 each. He put the shofar into the hands of all of them with empty jars and torches inside the jars. And he said, Watch me and do likewise, and see when I come to the edge of the camp, do as I do, and I shall blow with the shofar, and all those with me, when you shall also blow with the shofar round about all the camp, and say, For Yehova and for Gideon. And Gideon went with the 200 men who were with him, and came to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, as they had but newly posted the watch. And they blew the shofar, broke the jars that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew with the shofar and broke the jars, and held the torches and the shofar in their right hands for blowing. And they cried, A sword for Gideon, for Yehova and for Gideon. And each stood by in his place round about the camp. And the army ran and cried and fled. And 300 blew the shofar. And Yehova set the sword of each one against the other throughout the camp. And the army fled to Beth Shittah toward Tessarah, as far as the border of Abel Malo by Tabbath. And the men of Yisra'ЄL were called from Naphtali and Asher and Manasseh, and pursued Midian. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, Come down to meet Midian, and capture them from the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were called and captured the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. And they captured 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb, while they pursued Midian. And they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon beyond the Jordan. And the men of Ephraim said to him, What is this you have done to us by not calling us when you went to fight with Midian? And they contended with him sharply. And he said to them, What have I done as compared with you? Are the gleanings of Ephraim not better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? So this is pretty interesting. So they win with 300 people. So it's a great miracle. And then the Ephraimites are really mad. They're like, Why didn't you call us up? Which he probably did. They just sat there, just like they did back in chapter 5. It said that they stayed where they were. And Ephraim is against Amalek. So they're really not interested in helping a fight, but then they want the glory when it happens. But they killed him because God had them captured and captured them from the watering places. So all the men of Ephraim were called. So Ephraim was called, and they captured the watering places, and they captured the princes. So Ephraim got the glory because they got to capture the princes at the end and to kill Zeb. And they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon beyond the Jordan, but they're still mad that they weren't involved in the whole thing. People are funny, aren't they? Our little sin nature sure is a booger-boo to deal with. Goodness knows mine is. All right, so chapter 8, continuing on, verse 2. And he said, What have I done? Are the gleanings of Ephraim not better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? So he's saying that, verse 3, Elohim has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and what was I able to do as compared with you? And when he said that, their rage towards him subsided. So they come at him. They're really mad that they weren't invited. And he's like, Listen, you got the glory spot, dudes. You got to kill them. And they were like, Yeah, you're kind of right. So thank you, and let it go. And Gideon and 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan, passing over, weary yet pursuing. And he said to the men of Sukkot, Please give me loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing. Zebah and Salumna, sovereigns of Midian, but the leaders of Sukkot are the hands of Zebah and Salsumna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army. And Gideon said, Because of this, when Yehova has given Zebah and Salmunna into my hands, I shall tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. And he went up from there to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Sukkot had answered him. So he spoke to the men of Penuel, saying, When I come back, I shall break down this tower. And Zebah and Talmunna were at Kor, and their armies with them, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the army of the people of the east. Now those who had already fallen were 120,000 men who drew the sword, and Gideon went up by the way of those who dwelt in the tents on the east of Nobah and Yogabah, and he struck the camp while the camp was at ease. And Zebah and Salmunna fled, and he pursued them and captured the two sovereigns of Midian, Zebah and Salmunna, and shuttered the entire army. And Gideon, son of Joash, returned from battle from the ascent of Heres and captured a youth of the men of Sukkah and questioned him. So the youth wrote down for him the leaders of Sukkah and its elders, 77 men. And he came to the men of Sukkot and said, see, Zebah and Salmunna, about whom you taunted me, are the hands of Zebah and Salmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary. And he took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars with them. He taught the men of Sukkot a lesson. And he broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. And he said to Zebah and Salmunna, how were the men whom you killed at Tabor? And they answered, they were like you. Each one looked like the son of a sovereign. And he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As Jehovah lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. And he said to either his firstborn, rise and kill them. But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. And Zebah and Salmunna said, rise yourself and fall on us, for as a man is, so is his might. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Salmunna, took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. So the men of Yisra'eel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son's son, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said, I do not rule over you, nor does my son rule over you. Yehova rules over you. And Gideon said to them, I have a request to make of each of you, that each of you give me a ring from his spoil, for they had rings of gold, because they were Ishmaelites. And he said, we shall certainly give them. And they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his spoil. And the weight of the gold rings he requested was 1,700 pieces of gold, beside the crescent ornaments and the pennants and the purple robes, which were on the sovereigns of Midian, besides the chains that were around the camels' necks. And Gideon made it into a shoulder garment and set it up in his city, Ophrah. And all of Yisrael went whoring after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Thus Midian was humbled before the children of Yisrael, and they lifted up their heads no more. And the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. All right, so I'm going to pause here. So we see here in verse 8 that Gideon allows his pride to get the best of him. So despite the fact he was an extremely fearful dude, right? He is just really afraid, sounds like pretty much of his own shadow, and needs all these different signs, and God takes him in with 300. He forgets that God's the one who did the work, and he's acting like he's the big man on campus, threatening people, taking money. And even though in 23 he says, I do not rule over you, Yehova rules over you. So his, in the end, I believe his heart was in the right place. Let me just check if he's in I'm pretty sure that he is in the Hall of Faith. I'm pretty sure he's in here. Yeah, he is. So Hebrews 11 and 32. And what more should I say? For the time would fail for me to relate of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David and Samuel and the prophets. So he is in Hebrews 11. So he had faith. So he did believe, and he believed God, and he didn't want to, actually say, yeah, worship me. He said to worship God. So in words, he believed everything, but his actions still show a lot of pride. He took all of this gold, and then he turned it into a shoulder garment, which is pretty much a thing that the priests wore. So it would have been pretty big with the amount of gold he had taken, and he set it up in his town, and people would come and worship. So why go to the big temple, God's temple, if you can worship this big gold statue that was sitting in Gideon's town? So it's a shame that he turned out that way, but without throwing stones, it's pretty easy to let pride get to us as well. And I am the first one who's guilty. God will do such great things for me, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, I did this, or I posted that video, or I thought of that idea, when really I didn't. Everything I have is from God. The fact that he gave me a brain to do my job as long as I did is his. The fact that I live here now with a house that's paid off is his. All of it is his. And I am just his humble servant. And I try to remember to always keep it in the proper order. All right. So in 28, the land had rest for another 40 years under Gideon. That's going to be the last time they get 40 years. It's going to get shorter and shorter. So 29, Yisra'eel, son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house, and Gideon had 70 sons who were his offspring. Here yet again, we see some of his pride. So he had 70 offsprings because he had many wives, and he had a concubine. So he had a woman that he didn't marry who he had babies with, and he had lots of wives, and they had 70 sons. Can you even imagine it? And his concubine was in Shechem, and she bore him a son and gave him the name Abimelech. So Abimelech is one of the sons of his concubine. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age, and he was buried in the burial site of Joash's father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites, which is in Manasseh. And it came to be when Gideon was dead that the children of Yisra'eel again went whoring after the Baals and made Baal-Beroth their mighty one. Thus the children of Yisra'eel did not remember Yehova their Elohim, who delivered them from the hands of their enemies round about, nor did they show loving commitment to the house of Yisra'eel, Gideon, according to all the good which he did for Yisra'eel. So it didn't take them long to turn back to their old ways. Chapter 9, and Abimelech, the son of Yisra'eel, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke to them and with all the clan of his mother's father, saying, please speak in the hearing of the masters of Shechem, which is better for you, that the 70 men, all the sons of Yisra'eel, rule over you, or that one man rule over you. And you shall remember that I am your own flesh and bone. So he goes to his mother's brothers. So his mother was a concubine. She's not an unmarried lady. And he's comparing himself to the 70 who were the rightful heirs. And he's like, wouldn't you rather me be in charge than 70 of those other yahoos? And they agree with him. So his mother's brothers spake all of these words concerning him in the hearing of the matters of Shechem, and their heart inclined towards Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-Berith, which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. So you can see here, he's not doing too much good with his newfound favor. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Yisra'eel, all in one stone. So right away he goes and he kills everybody else because he's jealous of them and he doesn't want them coming after him. And Jotham, the youngest, was left, and he hid himself. So they killed 69, and one made it, Jotham. And all the masters of Shechem gathered together, and all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech sovereign besides the terebinth tree at the post that was in Shechem. And they informed Jotham, and he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried and said, hear to me, O you masters of Shechem, and let Elohim hear you. The trees went forth to serve a sovereign over them, and they said, see, the olive tree reign over us. And the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my olive oil, which my esteemed mighty ones, and go sway over trees? And the tree said to the fig tree, come and reign over us. And the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go and sway over the trees? And the tree said to the vine, come and reign over us. And the vine said, shall I have my new wine, which rejoices mighty ones, and go sway over the trees? And all the trees said to the bramble, come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me as sovereign over you, then come take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So this is a really interesting story. So he's pretty much relating Abimelech to bramble. He's saying like he's pretty much like a worthless piece of trash. The smallest little thing that bramble is like the tumbleweeds. If you've seen them blowing whenever they show like tornadoes and stuff, it would be like a little piece of junk coming and ruling over the trees. And the trees were the sons of Gideon, and he devoured the cedars of Lebanon. And now if you've acted in truth and integrity and set up Abimelech to reign, if you have acted well with Yisra'eel and his house and have done to him as his hands did to you, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. You've risen up against my father's house today and killed his 70 sons in one stone and set up Abimelech, the son of his female servant, to reign over the masters of Shechem because he is your brother. If you have acted in truth and integrity with Yisra'eel and with his house, then rejoice in Abimelech and let him rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the masters of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from the masters of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham, this is a prediction that will come true. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for the fear of Abimelech, his brother. And Abimelech governed Yisra'eel 3 years. So his vile and worthless characters and his bad nature isn't going to last very long. And Elohim sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the masters of Shechem, and the masters of Shechem acted treacherously against Abimelech. So they were trusting each other, but now they're not, right? Because obviously the whole thing started in deceit. In order that the violence done to the 70 sons of Yisra'eel might come and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother who killed them, and in the masters of Shechem who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And the masters of Shechem sent men to ambush against him in the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed over by them along the way. And it was reported to Abimelech, and Gael, son of Ebed, came with his brothers and passed over to Shechem, and the masters of Shechem put their trust in him and went to the fields and gathered their vineyards and trod out and held a feast. And they went to the house of their mighty one and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. And Gael, son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem that we should serve them? Is not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor and father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? If only his people were under my hand, then I would reprove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. And when Zebul, the governor of the city, heard the words of Gaal, son of Ebed, his displeasure burned, and he sent messengers to Abimelech by deceit, saying, see, Gaal, son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and they are besieging the city. And now go up by night, and the people are with you, and lie wait in the field. And it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, then rise early and rush upon the city, and see when he and the people who are with him come against you, and shall do to them as your hand finds to do. And Abimelech and all the people who are with him rose by night and laid in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance to the city gate, and Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, see, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, you are seeing the shadows of the mountains like men. And Gaal said again, see, people are coming down from the high part of the land, and another company is coming from Diviner's terebinth tree. And Zebul said to him, now where is your mouth with which you said, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despised? I beg you, go out and find them now. So Gaal went out, leading the masters of Shechem, and fought Abimelech, and Abimelech pursued him, and he fled from them. And many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech stayed at Arumah. Zebul drove out Gaal with his brothers so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came to be the next day, the people went in the field, and they informed Abimelech. And he took his people and divided them into 3 companies, and laid wait in the field, and looked and saw the people coming from the city, and he rose against them and struck them. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood on the entrance of the gate of the city. 2 other companies rushed upon all that were in the fields and struck them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and captured the city, and killed the people who were in it, and broke down the city, and sowed it with salt. Salt means you can't grow anything. And all the masters of the tower of Shechem heard it, and entered the stronghold of the house of El-berith. And it was reported to Abimelech that all the masters of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Salmon, he and the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe with his hand and cut down a branch from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. And he said, who were with him, what have you have seen me do? Hurry as I have done. So all the people likewise cut down each one a branch, and followed Abimelech, and put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them. So all the men of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. And Abimelech then went to Tebetz, and he encamped against Tebetz and captured it. However, there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and the masters fled there and shut themselves up, went to the top of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, and approached the door of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on the head of Abimelech and crushed his skull. And immediately called the young man his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed me. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Yisra'ელ saw that Abimelech was dead, each one went to his own place. Thus did Elohim repay the evil of Abimelech, which he had done to his father, to kill his 70 brothers. And all the evil of Shechem, Elohim turned back on their own heads, and the curse of Jotham, son of Zerubbabel, came on them. So remember, Jotham had spoken that curse, and God took care of it and wiped out this guy, Abimelech, who was not a very good leader at all. So next time, God willing, hopefully tomorrow, we'll be starting in chapter 10. And there's going to be 2 guys who come after him. After Abimelech, there was Tola, the son of Puah, a man of Issachar. So Issachar is going to rule for 23 years. And then Yair, a Gileadite, and he ruled 22 years. So those 2 guys are going to follow. 23 years and 22 years. And then we're going to go back to doing evil again in the eyes of Yehova and serving the Baals, which is not surprising. And the next guy who's going to be brought up, Jephthah, is a very interesting dude. So God willing, that will be in the next study. So just wanted to share what I've got here. So far with Abimelech, we're at 256 years. And we've got so far the tribes that have been represented with the battles that are going on are Judah, Benjamin, Naphtali, and Zebulun, and Manasseh. And there will be more to come. So the summary for me as I was listening was God uses the weak. The second judge, Ehud, was weak in one hand. The third judge, Deborah, was a woman in a patriarchal society. And, you know, I'm a woman myself, and I take care of a lot myself, but I wasn't in this time when it was very odd for women to be in charge. But thank goodness for her. She seems like an amazing lady. But it just shows a sign of the times where the men were not willing to stand up, and so the women had to. And she called for Barak to go to battle, and he was kind of unwilling and needed her to go along, but he did. And then Gideon was afraid, requiring 4 signs before he would trust. And it's just shows that despite our fear, God can work with us anyway, and he can move us where he needs us to be. Yehova Elohim tells us in Paul's teachings of 1 Corinthians that he uses the weak, so he is given the glory. Look at your calling, brothers. We were not many wise according to the flesh, but not many mighty, not many noble. But Elohim has chosen the foolish matters of the world to put to shame the wise, and Elohim has chosen the weak of the world to put to shame the strong. And that's 1 Corinthians 1:26-27. So consider the following who overcame great odds and gave with all praises to Yehova Elohim. So we had David. He was a young man who killed a giant over 9 feet tall with a stone and a slingshot, and that's in 1 Samuel 17. The 4 women in Christ's genealogy, Tamar, she played the harlot with her father-in-law, her future, who ended up marrying her. Ruth was a Gentile, a Moabite. You had Uriah, who was an adulteress. So that was the woman that David was with, where Solomon came from, Bathsheba. And then you've got the 4th is Rahab, who is a harlot. So in Matthew, you've got these 4 women of all kinds of different varying backgrounds, none of which is, holy or pure, being used of God. And then Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, raised out of prison to be the second command in Egypt. So Genesis 37:28, he's sold. And then 39:20, he's sold into prison. 41:14, raised up. And 41:40, he's put in charge. So pretty awesome stuff. God's amazing. He uses the weak, so we don't have to be afraid of our stature. He uses us, so he gets the glory. Just remembering to put the glory where glory is due. So with that, let's close in prayer, and God willing, we'll be back at it tomorrow. Father God, I just praise you for this beautiful word, Father, and I just pray that the words would go out and land on the people that you want to touch, Father. And I just praise you for your love and your mercy, for this beautiful weather, for the food that we have to eat, for warm places that we have to sleep. There's so much to be grateful for, Father, and you're just an amazing Father and so loving and kind. I praise you in all. Amen. All right, y'all. Have a blessed and beautiful day.